The music industry does not prepare its greatest voices for what comes next. There is no institutional structure, no career counseling, no honest conversation between a label and an artist about the moment when the instrument starts to go. What exists instead is a commercial machine that continues booking tours, selling tickets, and generating revenue right up until the moment audiences start looking at each other during the show.
Look at my face. My name is Monica.
This video is about that moment. It is about 10 female singers, some of the most gifted and commercially dominant voices of the last 5 decades, and the documented, on-record evidence of what time, illness, and the relentless physical punishment of a professional performance career have done to the instruments that made them legends. This is not a takedown. These are documented facts, tour reviews, medical disclosures, the artist's own words in their own interviews, and the publicly available footage that audiences and critics have already responded to on the record. We are telling the full story, because the full story is the only version worth telling. Stay with us through number 1, because the entry at the top of this list is the only one on it that handled the situation with complete honesty. And what she said publicly in 2013 is something almost no one in this industry has ever been willing to say. If you are here for the real history of music, the documented version, without the industry spin, subscribe and hit the bell icon. We drop deep dives like this every week. Number 10, Madonna. The Celebration Tour of 2023 and 2024 was conceived and marketed as a career retrospective. 4 decades of pop dominance revisited on a major international tour. In execution, it became one of the most controversial touring events in recent memory, and the controversy began before a single show was performed. In late June of 2023, months before the rescheduled shows were set to begin, Madonna was rushed to the intensive care unit with a severe bacterial infection that left her hospitalized for several days. She was 64 years old at the time of that hospitalization, turning 65 the following August. The health crisis forced a significant postponement and reset the entire production timeline.
I prayed that the days would last, they went so fast.
When the rescheduled shows began, the problems did not end with the performances. Fans who attended reported set times beginning 2 to 3 hours late, not occasionally, but consistently across multiple dates. Some audience members left before the first song ended. Multiple lawsuits were subsequently filed in both New York and Los Angeles over the chronic delays, making this one of the rare concert tours to generate legal action specifically over start times. What audiences saw on stage when the show did begin raised its own set of questions. The choreography was visibly scaled back from what her productions had historically demanded. The backing tracks carried the majority of the musical weight throughout the show. The vocal moments that did break through were noticeably thin when set against the commanding, fully present performance persona she had owned through the 1980s and 1990s. Number 9, Cyndi Lauper. 14 Billboard Hot 100 entries, 2 Grammy wins. A debut album, She's So Unusual, that spent nearly 2 years on the chart and sold more than 16 million copies worldwide. One of the most immediately distinctive voices in the history of commercial pop music, built on a piercing, acrobatic range that made her instantly recognizable from the first note. In 2024, Lauper announced the Girls Just Wanna Have Fun farewell tour, her 16th concert tour, named after her 1983 debut single, beginning October 18, 2024 in Montreal, and scheduled to conclude August 30, 2025 in Los Angeles. She clarified publicly that she is not retiring entirely, remaining open to occasional performances, and stated plainly that she wanted to do an arena tour while she was still strong enough to do it properly, acknowledging directly that she did not know what her physical condition would be in 4 years. That degree of self-awareness made the Glastonbury appearance in June 2024 more difficult to process. At 71 years old, Lauper visibly struggled to find her pitch during the set, most notably on Time After Time, a song she has performed thousands of times across a 40-year career. Viewers watching at home noted that she was out of time and out of tune in passages, and the reviews documented the same observations. That piercing, acrobatic instrument, the voice that was once considered one of the most technically distinctive in pop music, was audibly no longer operating at the level her 1985 peak had established. Number 8. Courtney Love.
Look at my face. My name is Monica.
The alternative rock explosion of the early 1990s produced some of the most viscerally raw live performances in the history of the genre. Courtney Love was at the center of it. Hole's 1994 album Live Through This, released April 12th, eventually earned platinum certification in the United States and established Love as one of the defining voices of that era. The voice was never built on technical precision. It was built on something harder to manufacture: explosive, confrontational energy and an unpredictable presence that made every performance feel genuinely unstable in a way no rehearsed performance could replicate. That quality was the instrument. For a specific generation of listeners, it was irreplaceable. What emerged in rare live appearances from the mid-2010s forward, and in guest spots and festival appearances in 2023 and 2024, is something audiences and critics have documented with visible discomfort. Not discomfort at the trademark chaos, that was always part of the contract. Discomfort at the disappearance of the musical foundation beneath it. Pitch, timing, and breath control, the basic structural requirements of any live vocal performance, were described by multiple reviewers and audience members as essentially absent across these appearances. Former fans who grew up with Celebrity Skin and Malibu have described watching recent footage with a mixture of nostalgia and genuine concern. Uncertainty about whether what they were seeing represented artistic reinvention or something considerably more troubling about an artist who once owned a room in a way that very few performers ever have. Number 7. Paula Abdul.
I'm moving way too slow.
Before American Idol made her a household name for a second time, Paula Abdul had already built a historically significant commercial record. Her 1988 debut, Forever Your Girl, spent 64 weeks on the Billboard 200 before finally climbing to number 1, a record at the time for the longest chart climb to the top position. The album produced 4 number-1 singles on the Billboard Hot 100, a record for a debut album by a female artist at the time, and earned her a Grammy Award for Best Music Video for Opposites Attract. The important context for this entry is that her voice was always the secondary instrument behind her primary gift, which was movement. Abdul's choreography and physical performance capability were, at peak, extraordinary, legitimately among the best in the commercial pop world. That distinction matters because it clarifies what the 2024 mixtape tour alongside New Kids on the Block revealed. Critics and audience members reviewing those shows consistently noted that her vocal contributions were almost entirely pre-recorded. The live microphone moments that occurred revealed a voice that had not kept pace with the demands of her classic catalog. Her dancing remained impressive by any reasonable standard. That instrument has aged more gracefully than the vocal one. But the gap between what audiences were hearing and what she appeared to be singing grew impossible to ignore across the run of shows. Number 6. Grace Slick. Grace Slick possessed one of the most powerful voices the 1960s produced. She fronted Jefferson Starship through the 1970s and into the 1980s, charting hits under the shortened Starship name as late as 1985. Very few voices defined the psychedelic era more completely or more durably. Then she retired, and she explained exactly why, in terms that left no ambiguity. In multiple interviews, including a widely cited piece in the Wall Street Journal, Slick stated plainly that rock and roll performers over 50 look ridiculous on stage and should step aside. She applied that standard to herself without hesitation or exception, walking away while she still could before the instrument deteriorated publicly. She later extended that critique explicitly to peers who continued touring deep into their 60s and 70s, arguing that aging performers attempting to recreate their youth on stage was fundamentally undignified. Whether you agree with the position or not, the consistency between her words and her actions is something remarkably few of her contemporaries have demonstrated. She said it. She did it. No farewell tour, No carefully managed final appearances. She drew the line herself and held it. We are past the halfway point, and the stories in the top 5 are the most significant ones on this list, including an artist who won a Tony, an Oscar, an Emmy, and a Grammy, and whose 2022 Academy Awards appearance became one of the most discussed and documented moments of that ceremony. Number 5. Marianne Faithfull.
Hey, hey, have you heard? Blue whiskey's the rage.
In 1964, at 17 years old, Marianne Faithfull charted her debut single, As Tears Go By. That origin alone would have secured her a permanent place in the documented history of popular music. What followed was considerably more complicated. Faithfull survived years of addiction, periods of homelessness, and a creative resurrection with her 1979 album Broken English that introduced the weathered, smoke and gravel contralto she had developed through the intervening years to an entirely new generation of listeners. The voice that returned in 1979 was not the voice that had recorded As Tears Go By. It was something rawer, darker, and in its own way, more powerful. In 2020, at the age of 73, she contracted COVID-19. By 2021, she was giving interviews acknowledging publicly that she might never sing again, describing in specific physical terms what it felt like to try to produce sound with lungs that no longer responded the way they once had. A biographical documentary featuring her last ever recorded singing performance premiered at the 82nd Venice International Film Festival. Marianne Faithfull died in London on January 30th, 2025, at the age of 78. The voice that had survived addiction, homelessness, and a career full of documented devastation finally met something it could not overcome. Her story is not simply about vocal aging. It is about what it means to lose the instrument that defined you, and the specific, irreversible way that loss arrived for her. Number 4. Belinda Carlisle. The Go-Go's made history in 1981 as the first all-female band to write their own songs, play their own instruments, and reach number 1 on the Billboard 200 with their debut album, Beauty and the Beat, an achievement that permanently secured their place in rock history regardless of anything that followed. Carlisle carried that momentum into a solo career that produced Heaven is a Place on Earth in 1987, a transatlantic number 1 that sold over 1 million copies and became one of the defining pop singles of the decade. The voice at that moment was bright, effortless, and commercially bulletproof, an instrument that seemed to operate without visible effort and deliver pitch-perfect results at pop's most demanding commercial register. Decades of touring and the sustained physical demands of maintaining a pop catalog have taken a measurable toll. In candid interviews throughout the 2010s and into the 2020s, Carlisle admitted to using teleprompters for lyrics she had performed thousands of times, citing anxiety and memory challenges as the reason. Live footage from her solo tours during this period showed an audible reduction in range and breath support, particularly in the up-tempo passages that once sounded so frictionless. She has spoken openly about these challenges, and her fan base has largely responded with warmth and continued loyalty. But the gap between 1987 and the documented live footage of recent years is difficult to overlook when the microphone reveals what time has done to the instrument that made Heaven is a Place on Earth what it was. Number 3. Debbie Harry. Parallel Lines, released in August 1978, is one of the most consequential albums in rock history, and the case for that status is not built on nostalgia. Heart of Glass crossed disco with new wave in a way that permanently altered both genres and reached number 1 across multiple continents. Blondie built an entire career on one of the most distinctive vocal personalities in pop music. Cool, almost detached, operating with an authority that nobody else could replicate because it was entirely personal and entirely specific to Harry. She became one of the most photographed and imitated women of the late 1970s and early 1980s. The voice was the anchor of everything the band produced. Now in her late 70s, the performances have shifted in ways that reviewers at major festival appearances in 2022 and 2023 documented consistently. Her delivery had settled into something closer to a melodic spoken word style, navigating around the higher registers rather than meeting them directly, finding ways through the material that preserved the shape of the songs without demanding what the voice can no longer reliably produce. The band around her remained tight, professional, and capable. Her stage presence still carried undeniable charisma, built over a 50-year career. But the distance between what the recordings promised and what the live performances delivered grew wider across these documented appearances, leaving longtime fans divided between genuine admiration for her continued presence and honest concern about what they were hearing. Number 2. Liza Minnelli.
Farewell.
Liza Minnelli is one of the rare EGOT holders in the history of the entertainment industry, and the credentials behind each of those awards are not honorary or ceremonial. They are earned across some of the most technically demanding work in American performance. Her 1972 performance in Cabaret is still taught in film schools as a masterclass in inhabited character work. Her live concerts through the 1970s and 1980s were considered among the most technically demanding and emotionally generous shows in all of show business, not just in pop music, but across the entire landscape of live performance. The voice, the movement, and the theatrical instinct were operating simultaneously at a level that almost no one else in any genre could approach. Her appearance at the 2022 Academy Awards became one of the most widely discussed moments of that ceremony. Seated in a wheelchair and visibly requiring significant physical assistance, the contrast between the performance demands her career had historically made and the visible effort required simply to project composure in front of a live audience and a global broadcast became the unavoidable center of the moment. What moved many viewers was not the wheelchair itself. It was the evident strain of maintaining the professional presence she had sustained for 60 years in public life, now requiring a visible and significant effort to produce. Health challenges have continued to limit her ability to perform in any traditional sense. For a woman who once gave everything she had to a live audience as a fundamental professional commitment, the contrast between that history and the current documented reality is both deeply poignant and impossible to minimize. Number 1. Linda Ronstadt. In 1977, Linda Ronstadt became the first artist in recorded music history to have 3 simultaneous platinum-certified albums on the charts. Simple Dreams, released that same year, sold over 5 million copies in the United States alone, and knocked Fleetwood Mac's Rumors from the number 1 position on the Billboard 200. That is the specific commercial context. She displaced one of the best-selling albums in rock history from the top of the chart. Her range across genres was legitimate and documented, not a marketing claim, but a demonstrated technical and interpretive capability. Country, rock, opera, the Great American Songbook. She moved between all of them with a fluency that left critics reaching for new vocabulary to describe what she was doing. 10 Grammy Awards across 5 decades placed her in a category shared by almost nobody in the history of popular music. And then she stopped. Not with a farewell tour, not with a carefully managed series of final performances designed to generate a last commercial moment. In her 2013 memoir, Simple Dreams, and in a deeply candid 60 Minutes interview that same year, Ronstadt disclosed that she had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and that she could no longer sing a single note. Not struggling, not diminished, gone. She stated it without self-pity, without asking for adjusted expectations, and without performing the fiction that there was still something to offer a live audience. She had made peace with that reality. In a list full of stories about artists who continued past the point where continuing was advisable, through illness, through vocal decline, through the visible and documented evidence of what time had done, Ronstadt's story stands entirely apart. Not because of what was lost, which was as significant as any loss on this list, but because of the honesty and grace with which she accepted it. She did not ask her audiences to lower their expectations. She did not put them in the position of witnessing something difficult and calling it a celebration. Linda Ronstadt understood something that almost no one else on this list, and almost no one in the history of this industry, has ever been willing to publicly admit that there is a moment when the right thing to do is stop. And she stopped. 10 documented stories. 10 voices that defined eras. One of them handled the end with a clarity and honesty that the music industry almost never produces. Which entry on this list hit you the hardest? Did you see any of these performers at their peak? Live, in the room? Drop the city and the show in the comments. That conversation is always worth reading. Subscribe if you have not already, and hit the bell so the next deep dive lands in your feed the moment it drops. The full, honest, documented history of music, told straight, is what this channel is built to do.